before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that our program today is in the state of Minnesota, and our boundaries share boundaries with the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Dakota, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk people. And that's a really important thing to do, this acknowledgement, because that's a starting point. It's a starting point to a life of learning about the complexities of this place we call home, about the nuances of the place we call home. And our talk today will kind of further expand how we understand the state of Minnesota, but also the sky above us. So really exciting stuff. And I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker. I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce Travis Novitsky. Travis is a proud member and lifelong resident of the Grand Portage Anishinaabe Nation in northeast Minnesota. Travis has been photographing the woods and waters of the North Shore of Lake Superior for more than 35 years. He is a self-taught nature and wildlife photographer whose work focuses primarily on his ancestral homelands in Minnesota. Travis specializes in images of nature and wildlife, but his favorite subject by far is the night sky. He served as co-producer and narrator of Northern Nights, Starry Skies, an award-winning documentary co-produced in 2022 by Hamline University's Center for Global Environmental Education and PBS North. Has anyone in here seen that documentary? Okay, yeah, exceptional documentary. Travis did amazing work. There's a QR code in your program to check that out after the program today if you want to see that. And in addition to that, Travis also was the photographer for the book, Spirits Dancing, which we will actually have a book signing after our talk today. A little bit about Spirits Dancing. It was published on November 7th, 2023 by the Minnesota Historical Society Press. It was written by astrophysicist, artist, and director of the Native Skywatchers Research and Programming Initiative, Annette S. Lee. The book explores the wonders of star bathing, sitting quietly under the stars, knowing that humans have always done this, knowing that we literally come from the stars. And without further ado, let's give a little round of applause for Travis Novitsky.
Thank you, Christian. Everybody can hear me. I just turned my mic on. Do I sound okay? All right. Thank you. Miigwech. Thank you to everyone here today. Thank you to the Minnesota History Center and the Minnesota Historical Society Press for inviting me to share my work with you. And I'm going to do a quick intro in Ojibwe Moen, which is the language of my ancestors. Buju and Denawema Ganidug, Anin, Travis and Dijnikaz, Makwa and Dudem, Gichioni Gaming, Gichigami, and Anishinaabe. So hello all of my relatives, my name is Travis. I am from the Bear Clan, and I am from the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. And you might also hear us referred to as Ojibwe, well, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, or Chippewa. All three names refer to the same people, if you're not familiar. And so, Mawanji Idada, Jinagada Wendamang, Dibika Gijik. Let's gather with each other in order to contemplate the night sky. So I like to start off with this map of Minnesota. The map illustrates how Minnesota was at one time 100% indigenous territory, and it outlines all of the treaty areas and reservations throughout the state. And Grand Portage, my home, is at the very northeast tip of Minnesota. It's bordered by Lake Superior to the east and south, Ontario, Canada to the north, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, and Superior National Forest to the west. The area has some of the most dramatic terrain that Minnesota has to offer. It has rugged mountains, beautiful inland lakes, wild rivers, very dense forest, and some of the darkest night skies to be found anywhere. For a photographer, it is what I like to call an incredibly rich place to call home. Grand Portage is also at the tip of what is known as the Arrowhead region of Minnesota. And my dad worked for Grand Portage for his entire career, and when he was still working, he used to joke with visitors and say that without Grand Portage, there would be no point to Minnesota. And I think that's one of his best jokes he's ever had. So there's been a lot of attention surrounding the subject of dark skies in the past few years, and that plays right into my passion, which is night sky photography. You know, as Christian mentioned, I was part of a documentary that came out in November of 2022 called Northern Nights, Starry Skies. That film won several awards, including a regional Emmy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Environment and Science. And I had this book called Spirits Dancing, which came out in November 2023. Written by Annette S. Lee. Thank you. Founder and director of the Native Skywatchers Initiative, and it features my photography, of course published by the Minnesota Historical Society Press and available through most booksellers. And I would just like to express my sincerest thanks for all of the community support, which has helped make these projects so successful. And one interesting side note about the documentary, besides the documentary itself, is since it was produced by PBS North in Duluth, PBS has a website called PBS Learning Media, and there were some learning resources developed along with the documentary to kind of address some new teaching standards in Minnesota, which have to do around, you know, indigenous culture. And there's not a lot of resources out to help teachers implement that. So that was one of the goals of the learning resources developed with the documentary. But within a month, I think it was a month or two, of those resources being available on the Learning Media website, they had been downloaded and used by teachers in all 50 states. So I have been photographing the woods and waters of the Lake Superior region for over 35 years now, ever since I got my first camera when I was in 8th grade. I'm basically a self-taught nature and wildlife photographer, with my photography focusing mainly on my native homelands in the area that is also known as the Heart of the Continent region. But I've also traveled pretty extensively throughout the West, Southwest, and Alaska. But even throughout those travels, you know, I've seen really amazing, beautiful areas, but I'm always drawn back to the beauty that we have here in this most unique of places. And one of the reasons I love the area so much is because it is, of course, my ancestral homeland, with my family history, you know, predating the existence of the state of Minnesota by, I don't even know how long, but it goes way, way back. But also because it's an oasis of darkness. So I have loved the night sky for as long as I can remember. From nights spent with my dad while he was capturing images of the sky on film, to after dark walks with my mom, to moonlight hikes and bike rides, the night sky has always been there and I've always loved it. Nights spent under the glow of a sky filled with stars and the dancing lights of the aurora borealis are some of the best memories that I have. And these experiences stick with you and increase your appreciation for the outdoors like few other experiences can. So I love photographing the night sky, but I also love the simple act of just being with it and experiencing it. For me, it's my number one anchor that keeps me grounded and centered. And oftentimes the most notable quality of the night is how quiet it is. I've experienced many nights where that silence can be almost deafening. But sometimes in order to really hear that silence, you need to push everything out of your mind and let yourself truly be in that moment. And that's not an easy thing to do. You know, our minds tend to always be running with some sort of thought or memory. Our subconscious is always replaying that day's events or thinking about what might happen tomorrow. And most of the time, I don't think we even realize that we're doing that. And that's why I like the night sky so much. It's the easiest way that I can quiet my mind and just be there in the present. And when I'm gazing up at the sky, especially on such a quiet night like you see here, I feel completely relaxed and refreshed. Anybody else able to relate to that a little? Quite a few hands, most people. My approach to photography is also very much a mindful process, and by that I mean, I put a lot of thought and planning into it, and the implementation of it is very intentional, and it takes a lot of time. I spend countless hours in the daylight scouting for possible locations to photograph at night, and I'm always on the lookout for potential locations for photographing the night sky. So this photo here shows my former Jeep camper, I call it, in northern Arizona. I mean, it looks just like a normal Jeep, but I have a different Jeep now, but it's pretty much the same layout, and it's my typical setup for when I'm out there exploring at night, no matter where I might be, whether it's the deserts of the Southwest or the North Woods of Minnesota. And what I've done is I've taken the back seats out and kind of removed those rear seats, installed a flat kind of cargo floor, which makes a great sleeping platform. So I can comfortably sleep right in the back of the vehicle. And because the vehicle is, it's four-wheel drive, high clearance, there isn't a road I've come across that I'm unable to drive down yet. So I can explore pretty much anywhere there's a dirt road. And this allows me to be very mobile and camp pretty much anywhere I want to as well, as long as it's legally allowed, of course. And Southwest is great for that. There's a lot of BLM land where you can camp just about anywhere, really. So when I find a beautiful landscape, such as a lake that has an intriguing curve to the shoreline with some nice pines or some other foreground element, I'll be looking at the direction and thinking ahead. In my mind, I'll be trying to visualize what that area might look like at night, whether the Milky Way will line up or whether it would be a good spot for some northern lights, sometimes both. And then I'll start to plan for when I might want to go back there at night to try and photograph these things. And in some cases, there are many, many hours, if not days, invested in scouting one location, and sometimes even years will pass before I make it back there to photograph it at night. And throughout this planning process, I'm spending time in these locations at different times of the day and different times of the year. And this time spent there helps create a familiarity and a connection to the place. And I do believe that investing in this process yields stronger photographic compositions and images that draw the viewer in and hopefully make them feel something. Maybe something along the lines of what I felt as I went through that process of making that image a photographic reality. So typically when I arrive on location, it'll be before it gets dark. I'll get there an hour or two before the sun goes down. And just sitting in a spot and watching the light change, that's one of the magical things about being anywhere, I think. You can be in the middle of a city and watch that same thing. Watch as the light washes down over the buildings in the skyline, getting warmer in color as the sun drops closer to the horizon. And as that moment is arriving, when daytime transitions into nighttime and the sunlight's going away, soon to be traded with starlight, in those moments, everything else kind of melts away. I'm there, I'm with the stars, and that's all there is. It's that simple. So does anybody recognize this image? I think several of you are holding it in your laps right now. I know this little girl in the front is. She was excited to get the book. Thank you again. This is the cover of the book on the right side, and it's a great image for the book cover because we just folded it, and so the left half is the back cover. But an interesting little story about this one, I have a print of this on my wall at home, and didn't order it with any framing or anything. It's a metal print, so it has no matting or border around it. And when I took it out of the box, and I kind of looked at it, and I'm like, oh, what the heck? Like, this doesn't look right. Like, the trees are on the left. They're supposed to be on the right. And the Milky Way, like the Northern Lights, that's south. Well, here I was holding it upside down. And it's kind of an image that breaks the photographic rule of you don't put anything, like never put your horizon line right in the center of the image. But it's turned out to be one of my most popular photographs and one of my favorites too. Maybe because it breaks that rule, I don't know. But water connects, the earth and the sky. And this is often most evident when you're at an inland lake and you see the stars in the Milky Way reflecting on the surface of that lake. And on those nights when there's absolutely no wind, you can see this almost perfect reflection, this mirrored image of the sky. And if you're out on the lake in a canoe or a boat, the sky is both above and below you. And it can feel like you're floating out there in the universe, drifting through space rather than across the surface of the lake. And it can be hard to tell which way is up and which way is down. I mean, I've been out there has anybody experienced that? Like, I've been out in a canoe, like, on nights like this, and it makes you it feels like you're gonna tip over because you're so used to having, like, I guess the texture of some ripples on the water to kind of give you that distinction that you're on the water. But when it's like this, it's pretty surreal. But no matter what's going on, no matter what kind of difficulty I might be having, I can go to a place like this and just lose myself in it and get lost in that experience. Even though I grew up in a tribal community, my path did not cross much at all with indigenous star knowledge until recent years. So it's been quite an education and quite an honor getting to know Carl Gaboy and Annette Lee of Native Skywatchers, as they have shared some of what they've learned over their lifetimes of putting some of these pieces of star knowledge together. And to this day, Carl and Annette both continue to study the connection that indigenous people have with astronomy and constellations. And they have graciously given me permission to share some of the knowledge that I've learned from them. So for the next few slides, I'd like to quote some of Annette's writing from our book, Spirits Dancing. Indigenous nations have studied the sky for millennia, and their cosmologies are vast and deep. Teachings about the aurora are often intertwined with teachings about the Milky Way and the night sky. Some of this knowledge is protected, most of it has not been written down, and much of it has been lost due to colonization. The connection between the aurora and the dancing spirit lights comes from the Ojibwe phrase, Jibayag Nima Idewag, which refers to the northern lights or aurora borealis. Jibayag translates as ghosts or spirits, and Nima Idewag translates as they dance. Another Ojibwe word for northern lights is wawate. There is a display of northern lights. And yet another term that can be used is wasa nude. Wasa, which comes from the word wasa moen, meaning lightning, or wasese, which means there is a flash of lightning. Nude comes from the word nuden, which means it is windy, there is a wind, or the wind blows. So wasa nude can sort of be translated as a flashing light's wind. And this concept of Jibayag Nima Idewag, or spirits dancing, also relates to the Ojibwe teaching about the Milky Way, or the Jibai Zibe, which is the river of souls. Ojibwe scholar and elder Carl Gaboy explains, that when the soul departs, it travels a path to the west. And after other trials, the soul comes to a great shining river, one whose reflection can be seen in the night sky, the Milky Way. The Ojibwe understanding of the Milky Way relates to the spirit returning to the stars along the Jibai-Zibe. The soul gets in a waiting canoe and paddles the river to the great beyond and greets all of the friends and relatives. So when we look up at the night sky and see the northern lights, it is our relatives dancing. Carl also talked about how there's this branch of the Milky Way that forks off and sort of disappears. And Carl says if people lived a good and proper life, they would stay on the main path to the afterlife. But if they did not live a good and proper life, they would travel off on that other fork and disappear into the cosmos. And I very vivid memory of sitting down and conversing with Carl, who was also in the documentary quite a bit, and was sharing stories with us. And when he was talking about this, he said, yeah, you just kind of went off and you just ceased to exist. Like there was no afterlife for you if you didn't live this good and proper life. So, but he said it, very ominously, and I thought, wow, what an incentive to live a good and proper life. Like, I don't think any of us wants to just, cease to exist. And by that I mean, our souls more than our physical beings. But yeah, Carl's great. Clearly, in the indigenous perception of both the Jibai-Zibit and the Jibayag-Nima-Idawag, the core understanding is not what can be recorded, but that which is fundamental to human nature, the spiritual journey. Here we see the relationship-based indigenous connection to the aurora and the Milky Way. The night sky is not solely an abstract collection of facts that exists externally to be measured, but rather like a close relative who exists nearby and whose influence is vast. The very name of the state of Minnesota has been appropriated from the Dakota phrase Minnesota Makoche, which translates as the land where the waters reflect the skies or heavens. And this idea of reflection and connection to the sky is a fundamental theme of Dakota cosmology. And the Dakota word for this twin relationship or pairing of earth and sky is kapemini. And this single word contains an entire cosmological philosophy. Its usual translation, as it is above, it is below, oversimplifies but speaks directly to this critical indigenous-based worldview of a mirrored relationship between earth and sky. The 7 council fires, also known as the Sioux Nation, are the people who speak the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota dialects. The 7 groups in the nation are mirrored by the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. And one Dakota translation of Northern Lights is Wanagi Thawachipi, or spirits dancing. And this perspective relates to the fundamental philosophy of origin. We come from the stars. Lakota spiritual leader Arvo Looking Horse, in addressing Native Skywatchers in 2021, explained that we came here as a spirit from Star Nation, and when we get done, we go back. The star knowledge is like a mirror. We have the stars up there, and we have the stars down here. And the connecting bridge between here and the spirit world is the road of the spirits, or the Milky Way. So during one of our conversations, Carl talked about how moose are central to Ojibwe culture. And being that I live where the moose live, I've been lucky enough to have had quite a few memorable encounters with them over the years. And here's one such moment where, as I was paddling down the Pigeon River in Grand Portage, I came around a bend, and here was this beautiful cow and calf just grazing right along the riverbank. And as soon as I saw them, I stopped paddling and I grabbed my camera. And as I drifted by, they both just watched. I had the camera up, and as I glided past, I just went click, click, click. I got maybe 5 or 6 shots. And only one of them ended up being in focus, which of course is this one. So that moment was mostly luck. But it always makes me think of, telling this story always makes me think of this quote that's out there that chance favors the prepared mind. And Todd, if you're still in the room, I know you looked this up once. Do you remember who that's credited to?
I don't remember offhand.
Yeah, I know we looked it up once, but anyway, it's a great quote. But in this case, I was prepared, and so chance favored my preparedness. I had my camera, I had the settings more or less the way I wanted them for the way the light was tending to be that day. But there was a luck part too, where, I happened to be passing by that spot right when the moose were there. Other encounters have required more deliberate planning and action, such as the time when my friend Paul and I went moose calling near Eagle Mountain up in Cook County. And the best time to call for moose is first thing in the morning in the fall. And this location that Paul wanted to go to was a good 30 or 40 minutes. Your brother Jason was with us, my cousin up there. Well, no, he wasn't with us this day when we saw the moose, but he went with us the week before when we got skunked. We didn't see any moose. So if he's heard me tell this story, he probably is kicking himself. But so it was about 30 to 40 minutes inland from Grand Marais, which meant I had to get up, a few hours before sunrise in order to have enough time to get ready, drive to Grand Marais to meet Paul, and then drive inland to the series of logging cuts where Paul had been seeing a lot of signs of moose activity. And we got there just as daylight was beginning to creep into the sky. It was a very foggy morning, super quiet, there was no wind. And we went to this first location that Paul had scoped out and called for over an hour, and there was no sign of any moose. And Paul had stated, in my experience, if you don't see a moose in the first hour, you're probably not going to see one at all that day. So after that first hour, we were pretty much resigned to the fact that the day was probably going to be a bust as far as moose sightings were concerned. So we drove up into this next logging cut. There was kind of a series of them there as they progressed up this hillside. And I saw, these old growth pines. I want to get out here and take some photos. Those pines look beautiful in the fog. And Paul said, yeah, okay, I'm going to go over here with my moose call, and I'm going to keep calling, just for the practice. I really doubt we're going to see anything. So I wandered off toward this big stand of pines to take some photos, and just a few minutes later, as Paul continued with his moose calls, I looked towards the big trees, and the captions cut it off a little bit, but you see him right in the center, right at the bottom. I saw the silhouette of this moose there. And of course, right away, you're like, uh-oh, I'm out in the middle of this big field. My car's like a couple hundred feet that way. Paul's like 100 feet that way. So I look towards him, and kind of in my best loud whisper, I'm like, Paul! And he hasn't seen the moose. So he turns towards me and he's like, what? Just loud. And I said, there's a moose over there. Huh? I said, shh, there's a moose over there. So he looks, and of course, right away, he sees it. And at that moment, the moose turned and looked right at us, probably because of Paul hollering. But, he obviously knew, the moose knew that there was something there because he was probably responding to the calls too. But Paul and I looked at each other. We looked back at the car, which, I mentioned was probably a couple hundred feet away. And we're out in the middle of this area that had been logged, a few years previous. And anybody ever tried walking through a logging cut trying to be quiet? It's really hard to do because there's always branches laying, and you walk about 5 feet and, you know. But we nodded at each other, and then as slowly and quietly as we could, we made our way back to the car. And once we were there, we went on the opposite side of the hood and set up our tripods and cameras pointed over the front of the car, kind of putting the car between us and the moose, and started taking pictures. And the moose, you know, he very slowly kept approaching us. He didn't seem aggressive at all, just seemed really curious. And I always like to mention at this point that Paul, when he does the moose call, he prefers to do a cow or a female call rather than a bull call, because as he says, I want the moose to come in looking for love, not looking for a fight. And they can come in pretty aggressive too, no matter which, if you're doing the cow or the bull call, but odds are, you know, they're going to be not too aggressive. If you do a bull call, you'll sometimes get 2 or 3 or 4 other bulls coming in, and they just start sparring, and it can get kind of wild. So as Paul continued to make, you know, an occasional call now and then, the moose would walk a little ways closer. He would stop and kind of look around for a few moments. Then he would walk another 50 feet or so, then stop and look around again. And every time he stopped, he did something, you know, very uncharacteristic of wildlife. He stopped in like this perfect position for some really nice photos. We both swore he knew he was being photographed and he wanted to pose. Because usually you'll have like, oh, there's a great, like this moose, right? He's over there, and it'd be a great shot, except there's a big old branch in front of his eye, you know. That's usually the case. So he got to within maybe 150 feet of us, and then he turned and walked off into the woods. And it was one of the coolest moose experiences that either of us had ever had. The fog, of course, helped make for some really unforgettable photos. Neither of us could believe how lucky we were that day to have shared those moments with that majestic animal. So here's a wide-angle photo that I just snapped with my phone showing how close he was. So telephoto lenses, of course, are essential for showing the perspective seen in those previous photos. And of course, you know, we were out calling, so we wanted the moose to come, but you don't want him to get too close. You always want to respect an animal's space as much as you can. So related to that, here's one of Carl's illustrations of the moose constellation. As you might guess, different cultures have different identities for familiar constellations in the sky, depending on what is important or significant to them. And a good example is the Greek constellation Pegasus, which in Ojibwe lore is a moose rather than a flying horse. And autumn is the time of the moose when they are most active and most aggressive as they look for a mate. Autumn is also when this constellation can be seen in our sky. So as you can see here, the great square of Pegasus is what makes up the body of the moose. And the next slide is one of my photographs where you can see the body of the moose constellation in the upper right half of the sky. So it's kind of tilted. It's not perfectly horizontal, but you see those 4 stars in the top right. That's the body of the moose. And we also have Cassiopeia here on the top left, where there's kind of that W shape in the stars. And then right above, these are maple trees, right above the tallest part of the maples, right in the middle, you see that kind of fuzzed out star, or what looks like a star. That's actually the Andromeda Galaxy. Another one of Carl's illustrations. To the Ojibwe, the constellation Orion is known as the winter maker and is the most noticeable constellation in our winter night sky. Carl has explained that some of the figures represented in the constellations are at the height of their power when they appear highest in the sky. And Wintermaker is a great example of that. As we progress through autumn, late in the night, just a few hours before sunrise, Wintermaker can be seen rising above the horizon. And during the deepest, darkest, and coldest depths of winter, this constellation is very prominent in the sky. And then, as spring slowly arrives, Wintermaker drops below the horizon, not to be seen again until fall. So here, this is a photo I made just October 5th, this last fall. And it shows Orion / Wintermaker rising above the treetops finally at about 3:30 in the morning. And then in the first hours of the new year, you can go out fairly early in the night and see that constellation already fully up in the sky. This is Carl's painting, which he calls Shooting the Wintermaker. And about the painting, he describes that the winter is too long, and so parents make bows and arrows for the children and then call them outside when it gets dark. And there they are told to shoot the Wintermaker from the sky. So they send their arrows flying upwards, and sure enough, they mortally wound him. After that, he slowly falls from the sky. Spring comes and it warms up. In another story from Carl's book, Talking Sky, Wintermaker wouldn't leave Nanabuju's land. Sick and tired of the cold and snow, Nanabuju decided that the only way to get rid of him was to trick him by offering him a great feast. The Wintermaker, who had accepted Nanabuju's invitation to the feast, arrived like a blizzard as he blew through the door of the lodge. He sat down and ate some dried fish. "Wouldn't you like some wild rice and dried cranberries to go with the smoked sturgeon?" asked Nanabuju. And that was only the start, for by flattery and cajolery, Nanabuju got Wintermaker to eat so much that he began to sweat. He threw off so much heat that the very snow began to melt. And it was then that Wintermaker realized he'd been tricked, and he escaped out of the lodge, running to the north. "Don't forget," he cried over his shoulder as he ran, "I will be back." As we all know, winter keeps coming back, right? Even within one winter. And a constellation visible to us in the summer is Nanabuju, or Scorpio. Nanabuju is a very prominent figure in Ojibwe culture, and as Carl describes, he is a very complicated character. He has many different aspects to him, both good and bad. And there are more tales told about him than any other character in Ojibwe history. In general, he is portrayed as the model for many cultural values and norms, and is thought to be the one who is responsible for the way things are in the world. So again, from Carl's book, Talking Sky, often he is a trickster, sometimes the tricked. Often the philosopher, and sometimes the debunker of philosophy. Often the teacher, sometimes the recalcitrant student. He is pictured as a giant and as a normal person, and can often take the form of an animal. He is simultaneously the twin brother of the wolf and the only child of a mortal woman and a spirit father. In short, he is the embodiment of all the qualities found in the catalog of Greek, Roman, Norse, and any other gods or demigods of the many human cultures. Yet he is distinctly Ojibwe, for he is the embodiment of the people. So here we have, this is from July 2018. I always forget to point this out. The 3 stars that make up Nanabuju's bow are how I find this constellation in the sky. And it's fairly low. It doesn't get real high for us. But this is middle of summer in July. So just to the right of that island, you can look up a little bit and see those 3 stars that make up the bow. And we had this cool conjunction of planets that summer too, where a lot of people think that this one on the left is the moon because it's reflecting so brightly off the surface of Lake Superior, but if that was the moon, we wouldn't see the Milky Way as clearly as we do. So that's Mars. And then the one way over on the right above the Grand Marais light pollution on the clouds there is Jupiter. And Saturn is blended in right in the core of the Milky Way there. So, anybody know what that is? Fisher, yep. The last constellation I like to talk about today is one that we are almost all certainly familiar with, and that is the Fisher. Although most know him more likely as Ursa Major, the Great Bear, or more commonly, the Big Dipper. Fishers are amazing creatures with incredible agility and prowess. I've seen them move through the forest as if the forest isn't even there. They can climb trees more easily and silently than you can imagine. And while I have seen them now and then over the years, mostly when I'm out mountain biking, I'll come across them on a forest road. And usually what they do is, I'll see one a couple hundred feet above me or ahead of me on the road, and it'll run across the road and then up the opposite side of a tree. And like this is a tree trunk, they'll run up there and kind of look around at you like that. And I always think, if I get my camera out or my phone out, by the time I get around that tree, I'll be able to see them and get a picture of them. Well, they're always gone. I don't know where they go, but they just seem to disappear. But of all those encounters, this here is the only good photograph that I've ever made of one. And I was just driving down the road in my car one day, and there he was, and right off the shoulder of the road. And I stopped and watched him for a few minutes. And like that moose, he posed very nicely for me. So, most Ojibwe stories are only to be shared in wintertime, and we're still kind of on the cusp of being in winter. But when there's snow on the ground, not so much down here. We still have a lot of snow on the ground up in Grand Portage, but just going to share a short summary of a Fisher story here. And it's a story about how Fisher earned his place in the night sky. And again, it's a story about a very long winter that would not end. And in this story, Fisher and his friends discovered that a great ogre beyond the edge of the sky had trapped all of the birds, and that's why winter would not end. So it was decided that they needed to do something to free the birds and bring an end to this long winter. And Fisher was chosen to go due to his speed and agility. He ascended to the sky world by way of a great pine tree. And while freeing the birds, the ogre and his brothers released a great volley of arrows at the brave little Fisher. After many successful attempts to dodge the arrows, one of the arrows found its mark and pinned him to the sky by his tail. Around and around he turned, and there he is to this very day. In this photo from July 2020, we can see Fisher, the Big Dipper, up there on the left. And we also have Comet Neowise right below it, which was a great thing to see and photograph that summer. And this was late July, so we're getting the first few Perseid meteors too. So I was lucky and captured a Perseid meteor up on the right. So while the Fisher story may seem like a sad story, it is in fact a story of bravery and courage and their rewards. For Fisher did not die. Each year he circles the heavens. In winter he crawls along the northern horizon, but in spring he gains power and ascends overhead. As he reaches the zenith, the birds come and summer is restored to the land. And then slowly he swings back to the west toward the horizon, and it's time for the birds to leave. So it is Fisher, in gaining power, who heralds the coming of the birds, and when he loses power, he is the messenger that tells them it's time to go. So I'd like to share one last passage from Carl's book, Talking Sky. When you think about it, stars are just stars. But constellations, the star figures, are the imaginary lines drawn between them. And constellations reflect the identity of the people who drew them. Their creativity, imaginations, wisdom, traditions, and science. So trying to put together the Ojibwe night sky, the sky figures, and the stories is a real and important way of understanding, appreciating, and honoring the Ojibwe and their life on the land. So before I wrap up, I'd like to share some of my more recent aurora photos, which were taken just at the end of, well, the last half of last year. So anybody in here suffering from sleep deprivation the week of October 6th through the 11th? It sounds like there's some familiarity with that. So because of the aurora events that week. I know I was, while the nights of the 7th and the 11th were the best in my opinion, almost every night that week yielded some auroras. This one was at about 1 o'clock in the morning on the 7th. And this is Devilfish Lake in Grand Portage State Forest. This lake has one of my all-time favorite northerly views. And October 7th, at about 10 p.m., looking south over Lake Superior with what I didn't know at the time, is known as a SAR arc, or a stable auroral red. And when I was looking at the sky on that night, I couldn't see that red arc at all with my eyes, but the camera, the first picture I took, it was very obvious. And I was like, what the heck is that? So I messaged my friend, Astro Bob King in Duluth, when I got home. And the next morning, he was out taking pictures too, so he didn't respond till the next morning, but he was all excited. Ooh, you caught a SAR arc. That's awesome. And the way he described it to me is the light that creates those is so pure that our eyes are unable to see it. Same night now, about 10:15, there was this awesome corona looking straight up through the trees. And the auroras were so bright that I could easily walk along the shoreline without the use of my headlamp. Kind of like a full moon in winter when the ground's all covered with snow. It was very, very bright. And this one shows the lights dancing over Hollow Rock Resort cabins on Lake Superior in Grand Portage. And from about 11:15 to 11:45, this funnel cloud shape stretched across the entire sky from east to west, both horizons connected by these incredible ribbons of light. So this was the view looking to the east, and this was the view looking to the west at the same exact time. And that ribbon that ran from east to west, it kind of spread out as it got above me, but it was pretty much, it tapered down at the horizon, got wider, and then tapered again at the other horizon. But the aurora activity was pretty much straight overhead. There was nothing going on to the north, nothing to the south. Until just after midnight. So about 12:15 a.m. on October 8th, that structure in the lights changed, and the sky, almost the entire sky, was now dominated by these really intense reds. And the red, for most people, our eyes pick up the red most easily. The green often looks like kind of an off-white or a gray, but that red really registers with most people's eyes. So this is the same viewpoint as the funnel cloud a few images back, but that funnel cloud is gone now, and the sky dominated by these red curtains. October 10th and 11th was also an interesting night. It was mostly cloudy for the majority of the night, but the clouds were thin and looked more like a weird kind of haze. But that haze gave the photos from that night a rather interesting and unique look. And For whatever reason, I usually shoot aurora with my camera on auto white balance. I know a lot of photographers don't like to do that. They like to control the color more. But I kind of like to see how the camera is going to interpret the colors that are there. And that night, they looked a lot more blue instead of the usual warmer green. Looking straight up into the sky again revealed some pretty mesmerizing views. And I love these abstract ones because you can really see oftentimes a lot of interesting shapes and figures in them. I'll leave it up to you guys to interpret what you see. Well, one time I was up in Alaska and I caught this super cool. I showed it to a lot of people and everybody goes, "That's a bear!" Like they see the bear in the shape of the lights. It's pretty wild sometimes. So jumping away from the Midwest here for a couple shots, this is a rather symbolic image that I made in Southern California just before the onset of the COVID pandemic. And the desert landscape surrounding the town of Borrego Springs has a large variety of metal sculptures by artist Ricardo Braceda. And when I learned of the sculptures, I knew I wanted to go there and photograph them at night. And I also like to name a lot of my images, and for this one I titled it Taming the Dragon. And it's kind of a good segue into my wrap-up here. I like to say, the start of this story is, the past, I guess it's about 5 years now, almost 5 years, have been tough on everyone. The COVID pandemic and its aftermath turned into something that none of us could have ever expected. And that has taken its toll on everybody in different ways. And we have all had to, tame that dragon, so to speak, in ways that make sense to us. But the universe doesn't always speak to us in ways that we can readily understand. Sometimes it makes us feel like the path before us is nothing but an endless stream of insurmountable challenges, things that, at the time of their occurrence, seem to be better at dragging us down than lifting us up. And I think we all face these struggles to some degree at some point in our lives. Other times it may seem as though everything is lining up in our favor. One good thing happens after another, little triumphs that all seem to be connected somehow. And depending on how much we've struggled in our lives, these little triumphs might be hard to embrace. We may not trust them and where they might be leading us. But these struggles and these triumphs become a part of us. They become a part of our individual history. And that history determines who we are as a human being at this point in time. Everything that we experience leads us to where we are right now. Photography and the experiences that I have in the pursuit and creation of my images are very healing, and the night sky plays a large part in that. They've proven themselves in that regard time and time again throughout my life. So I've already mentioned that I like practicing mindfulness and being in the moment as much as I can, and it's had a pretty profound effect on my life, but it hasn't always been that way. I used to busy myself with capturing as many images as possible and thinking about how or when I was going to share them with the world. But lately I've been doing less of that and instead trying to fully immerse myself in each of those moments and experiences. And much of the time when doing this, I might not even take my camera out of its bag. Sometimes when I do make images, maybe I don't share them for a month or more. Instead, I wait until it feels right to share them, if in fact I share them at all. And a while after I was already into this kind of shift in my method, I watched a TED Talk with actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and his talk was about paying attention versus getting attention. And the takeaway quote that resonated with me at that time was, if your creativity is driven by a desire to get attention, then you're never going to be creatively fulfilled. And I realized, at least on some level, that that's how I had come to feel. I wasn't feeling as creatively fulfilled anymore because the reasons I was doing photography had become more about satisfying others than about personal fulfillment. So I've been striving to get back to that method of being more mindful with my photography. And in that practice of being mindful, I've noticed that I feel much calmer than I used to. My mind doesn't race the way it used to. I feel rested and peaceful more often than not. And my actions with the camera are much more deliberate and thought out than they used to be. And these last few photos, I think, are good representations of that mindfulness. You know, each one is maybe one of 5 or 6 photos I took on each night, whereas I used to go out and shoot 100 or more. But I feel like they really convey the sense of calm and peacefulness that comes with truly being in a moment right then and there. And they also remind me of another favorite saying, and also title of a book about mindfulness, which says, wherever you go, there you are. So in closing, I would like to quote Annette one more time from the Spirits Dancing book. For millennia, humans have gazed at the night sky in awe and wonder. Western science provides fascinating insights into the physics of what we witness. Indigenous knowledge asserts powerful human connections to the stars and the northern lights. Our own quiet observation strengthens and deepens our relationship to the sky. With careful attention, we can feel our connection to generations past who have shared these emotions and curiosity. And we can recognize our connection to future generations and our responsibility for preserving this experience for them. So with that, I'd like to say miigwech and thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. Exceptional
Hopefully,
presentation.
I just want to add, hopefully
Yeah.
my voice didn't waver or crackle too much, because this is the largest group I've ever spoken to.
Awesome. That was, exceptional talk. And before we head up for the book signing, we will take a couple questions here. So raise of hands, and I will bring the mic your way. Right up in the
This is
front.
where Christian
Great.
gets a good workout up
Yeah,
and down the
I need to
stairs.
get my steps in, so please. Yeah.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. Wonderful talk. I was just wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about the process when you actually set up your camera to take these photos. Like, if it's a long exposure, how long you leave the long exposure on, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so everybody heard that okay, right? I should start adding this into the actual presentation because it's probably the question I get the most is, what are your exposure settings, basically? And so for the Milky Way, this photo is a great example. It's a pretty standard formula. I almost always use the same settings for a shot like this, and that's, well, first of all, it's using an f2.8 lens, so it's letting quite a bit of light into the lens. And I shoot with full frame cameras, which makes a difference too. But the exposure length is usually 25 or 30 seconds at 14 millimeter, and typically an ISO of 6400. I do have a different lens that I shoot with at 20 millimeter, and for that I try not to go longer than 20-second exposures, because the longer your focal length is, you're going to see apparent movement in the stars quicker. Yeah. Oh, the aurora shots. The aurora shots they can be all over the place. It just depends on how bright they are or how bright they're not. So for really bright auroras, I might shoot at ISO 400 and maybe just, 7 or 8 seconds. And other fainter events, I have to bump the ISO up to 1600 to 3200 and do 20 seconds, 25 seconds. Just depends on how strong, how bright they are.
Thank you for this book and this talk. Your book actually helped save my life. I had never seen, I saw the aurora once when I was little, but I don't remember it much. And last year I went to see my brother in Alaska, and I got to see it, of course.
Yeah.
And then I had just been homeless, and I moved to Little Canada, and now I see it all the time, surprisingly. And it literally saved my life, and I was like begging to get this book because my friend works here. And I'm like, found out you were coming. I'm like, I'm getting the book. I'm going to see him. Yay! But anyways, do you ever get excited when you're out there alone and start screaming? When you when you see it dancing and stuff? I do.
Well, yeah.
Does anyone else see this?
I used to. And that's not to say that I don't appreciate it as much as I used to, but, it's because I've been out on so many nights and seen it so many times, it's become very familiar. And so I have kind of, I guess you could say, lost that newness or edge that kind of comes with it being new and exciting. It's exciting in a familiar way versus exciting in a new way. So yeah, I mean, there's one shot in there where I'm doing this, and yeah, that night it was like, woohoo, like I can't believe I'm seeing this, And of course, I'm out there pretty remote, so it's not like when I say who else is seeing this, I'm probably talking to moose and wolves and yeah. But thank you.
Excellent. Do we have any questions from the back of the audience? Oh, one right up here. Yeah.
Oh, Carol. Hi.
Who is the man that's always in the photos? That's you? So you're photoing yourself?
Most often. I mean, my friend Paul was in a couple shots, with the moose there. But when you see a figure in there that's a small silhouette, that's usually me. Sometimes it might be a friend or my partner in there too, but it's most often me because usually I'm out there by myself. So I set up a timer on a tripod and I walk out and just wait for the camera to take the picture.
Oh, okay.
How close is that picture to what you see with the naked eye?
Good question. It is, of course, when we are out there looking at the Milky Way, it's not going to be as bright or as vivid as this image shows. It's going to be a lot fainter. I mean, the overall image is going to look the same, like the Milky Way is where it is. You'll see all of the same stars and stuff, but with the way it's processed to show on a screen and share with you is to make it a little more vivid and the intent isn't to make it look unrealistic, just to make like a better print is what I strive for, but trying to keep a sense of that realism by not making it too overexposed or too bright. I see a lot of photographs out there that, in my opinion, are a little heavily processed where you've got a foreground that looks almost as bright as daytime, and it never looks like that. So I try to avoid that sort of thing. But typically, I do I use Adobe Lightroom, so I make adjustments to the whites and the clarity slider. There's a dehaze tool that I like to use. But I'm always erring on the side of less versus more with the processing. So does that answer it for you? Great question. Oh, I like that one too.
Have you ever traveled around Holyoke Park, Holyoke, Minnesota?
No.
It's Lake Superior River Basin, and they have great waterfalls and lots
Holyoke, where's that?
It's Duquette or Carleton County.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it has beautiful pictures.
Thanks.
All right, I see one more here towards the front.
I got to get in front of these lights. I can't see anybody. Oh, there we go. Look at that. That must be Evan's magic. I can't see anybody, and everybody gets lighted.
Miigwech, thank you. I just wanted to ask, after you met Carl and Annette and started researching with them, whether your approach of photography changed.
That's a tough one to answer, but I would say it has changed. You asked if my approach has changed, you're correct? And I would say that not so much the approach to actually making the photographs has changed, but how I view the sky, how even if I'm not taking photographs, if I just go out and look. And the best way I can explain this is, like, typically the Ojibwe constellations, you know, are constellations that are familiar constellations in other cultures as well, but they mean different things, right? So to the Ojibwe, Fisher is Ursa Major, you know, the Great Bear. But the Ojibwe constellations often have additional stars that aren't part of the Greek constellation. And Wintermaker is a great example of that, where you have Orion, you've got those stars that make the feet, the stars that make the hands, but Wintermaker has these other stars, and I think Carl said it's, Todd, you might have to help me out, Aldebaran and Procyon, I think. But they make these longer outstretched hands, which I never noticed before, but now I can't unsee it. So when I go out there and look up and see Orion, I don't see Orion, I see Wintermaker. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we have a book signing to get to, so we can continue our conversation there. Books are for sale in the bookshop, but let's go ahead and give another round of applause for Travis Novitsky.